Welcome to podcast here today for Beck's. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm grain marketing consultant Matt Bennett. Basically, this market, since we talked last week, there was a little enthusiasm when we talked last week. To be honest, the dollar had been moving lower. Most commodities were moving a little bit in the right direction. Actually, corn had basically rallied since the January report. We all know that was a super bearish report. We covered that. We talked about what the implications looked like. But the dollar moving lower certainly gave us a little bit of a tailwind. Most commodities were moving higher. Of course, some were moving significantly higher. Look at the metals. I mean, that's been getting most of the press here lately. We came in towards the end of the week, and the pick for the Fed chair had been thought to be someone who would be called dovish, which would mean they would lower interest rates. That's typically viewed as a very inflationary type situation. It's part of the reason that we'd had some inflation, part of the reason that we'd had the dollar moving in a lower direction. Came out there Thursday night into Friday morning, and it became very apparent that Mr. Warsh was going to be elected as the new head of the Fed. He's not necessarily considered that way. He's actually considered hawkish, which would mean he'd be a little more reluctant to lower rates. It was a shock to the market, a shock to a lot of people that were observing because they felt like the administration would choose someone who would come in and lower interest rates very quickly. Now, in fairness to him, he's actually said in the last year or so that he felt like interest rates should have gone down a little bit quicker than what they did. But he's not a fan of what you call quantitative easing. In other words, just printing money until it goes out of style. So very interesting pick. What did that do to the commodity markets? Well, the dollar reversed higher. And then most of your commodities actually moved in the opposite direction, which is a pretty typical move. We saw the metals markets, silver, for instance, topped out there Thursday going into Friday at 121 and dropped $50 to 71. Just to give you an idea of what a move like that does, if you have one contract of silver, which is 5,000 ounces, one contract of silver, if you held on to it, had bought it at 121 and sold it at 71, would cost you $250,000. And so what happened is a mass exodus of the metals markets. I believe that spilled over into our commodity markets somewhat as well, but not nearly to the tune that we see. For instance, corn, backed off 3 or 4 cents there on Friday. We had a little bit of a rough start of the week here where we moved a little bit lower Monday. But as we speak, we're really pretty much unchanged on the day here on Tuesday because we've got a little bit of an upward move. Now, coincidentally, the dollar is lower again here this morning. And so maybe the news of the new Fed chair has wore off, so to speak, and we can continue with what I think, is a move where the dollar is really going to struggle to gain value. If that's the case, that's good for us from a commodity market standpoint. It's good for us whenever we think about corn exports being so strong here over the last, the first part of this marketing year. Current export forecast from the USDA is 3.2 billion bushels, which would clearly be significantly higher than what we've been experiencing. Last year was 2,834, I believe. So, you could be looking at maybe an extra 350 million bushels of demand. Currently, our pace would suggest actually that 3.2 is too low. But we have to keep in mind that the pace that we've already had may slow down, and so I think that's what the USDA is essentially betting on. So this is a very important month. We're setting, your crop insurance price. That's certainly going to be very impactful for most of us. I think it's interesting to see that, we're trading here between 455 and 460. As we speak, we're trading at 456. And so last year we were at 470. And so the problem with that, of course, 14 cents isn't an enormous amount, but it certainly makes a difference, especially whenever you're looking at, we have a lower spring insurance price, most likely without something unforeseen occurring here pretty quickly. At the same time, your input costs are higher. We all know that. Fertilizer has been certainly a bugaboo for many of us. We've definitely we've got a lot of angst whenever it comes to our profitability, our profit margins. And so, my good friend at Josh Linville came and spoke at our ag market conference this week. Bex was a premier seed sponsor there, made a presentation, had a great week. Josh Linville was one of the speakers though as well, and he talked about fertilizer. And in the case of, for instance, urea, supply and demand fundamentals would suggest that urea should be a little bit cheaper. But as he explained to us, just as in the case of anhydrous ammonia, for instance, when the pipeline's full of product, that product's been bought at a certain price, and unfortunately, it does not look like this is the time of year where any of us can expect to get any price relief. So I am concerned that if you waited, on fertilizer, I understand why you did so, but it certainly looks like it's going to be pretty tough to expect to get any relief there. So from a fertilizer standpoint, I believe all classes of fertilizer are still going to be quite similar to price levels that we saw here a year ago or last fall. If you look, for instance, at nat gas is it's your number one ingredient, of course, in production of anhydrous ammonia. 2 weeks ago, nat gas closed on Friday down at 269, which was the lowest we'd seen in, I believe, over 3 years. And so most of us felt like anhydrous ammonia certainly would back off. But the problem, once again, is the pipeline's full. Nat gas has rallied since then due to all this cold weather, and then it's back off again. So it's not quite down to where it was. But if I was going to be expecting to try to work my way, into some sort of relief as far as fertilizer goes, inputs goes, I know people don't love side dress, but I think you're going to have to work through all of this supply that we currently have on hand before you have a fighting chance of seeing some of those prices back off. So I would expect after the spring run, the potential would be there that maybe you could see anhydrous finally back off just a little bit. As far as your other fertilizers go, most of those are going to be applied before we get rolling in the field. I'm well aware of that. Now, in the case of 32 or 28, maybe there's a chance we get a little relief there as well as a side dress type application. But we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us. There's no question, but what are some of the solutions? One thing I've talked to growers about, and I've talked about it on here, but I'm going to say it again. You're pushing 460 for D's corn right now. If you could get in a situation with your bushels that are going in the bin where you can actually hedge those, this isn't a formal recommendation or anything, because that's not something that I'm really allowed to do. This is just an idea. Hedging 460 D's corn isn't a bad place to go in and hedge. I understand at your current basis for fall, it probably doesn't look worth a darn, but you also have to understand that if you've got bins at home, most likely what you're going to do is step in here, buy back that hedge next fall, whenever you've got carry in the market from D's to July, 25 to 35 cents. If we called it 30, then you would have a hedge at 490 basis of July. The only thing that you'd have to still set would be basis. You would not have to hold that hedge till July. You're basically waiting on the basis to come to you, and at some point you'll liquidate the hedge, sell your cash for a better basis than fall, which happens 95% of the time. And so I certainly think that's something we need to look at if we haven't done any marketing yet whatsoever. There's other things you can do with options. I think all of you know how to get a hold of me. Please post your questions, either in here or just email them to me. I know a lot of you have been emailing me things you'd like to talk about. And one of those things is, hey, just throw an idea or two at us, and I've got to be careful with that, but certainly a true hedge and then expecting to be able to take advantage of carry in the market and basis is certainly something that whenever we have grain bins, we have to, at least consider every year. So thanks for tuning in here today. Again, get a hold of me with your questions and any comments you've got, or just simply respond to the newsletter. Those of you that are getting that, if you're not, let me know and we'll figure out a way to get you on it. Thanks for tuning in today.